thank you for adjusting the amount of headroom and including Manjusri Bodhisattva, who's cutting away our delusions in the frame. So you may know that today is an auspicious day in Buddhist, Mahayana Buddhist tradition. It's what we celebrate as the enlightenment of Shakyamuni Buddha. So because of this, Zen Buddhists everywhere, including here, sat last night throughout the night. So I think we had like 17 people here last night who are probably not in the room now, probably home sleeping, but who sat through the night to honor the story of the original enlightenment of Shakyamuni Buddha. So celebrate, enter into that spirit of an awakening that each of us can benefit from, and all those we encounter benefit from our awakening. It's just an amazing thing. So one way that we find a way to honor those who came before us, who practiced years, centuries ago, is to call them out, these Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, and listen to their inspiring stories, to use that to inspire us. And, today, just as many days throughout many years in many centuries, we're all feeling concern for our political future here in this country and in the world, and the violence that we just heard about yesterday. So it's good to hear these kind of folk tales, nursery stories of the Bodhisattvas who faced difficulties in the past and managed, nevertheless, to support their communities. And I love stories. I hope you do too. And, in each tradition of Buddhism, there are favorites. There's Amitabha Buddha, Vairocana Buddha, Avalokiteshvara, Manjusri, Shakyamuni, Samantabhadra, on and on. Archetypes that express key qualities such as compassion and discernment, vow, service. Those are, kind of fundamental aspirational images for us. As in any spiritual tradition, it's good to have these points that we can look to and consider and examine ourselves and see how we come up to our desire to serve and to be a part of all that is. So I particularly like those quirky bodhisattvas, the ones that are kind of unknown, who creep up in various sutras, ones that you don't hear about very much. And today I'm thinking about one that is in the Lotus Sutra, a character who is he lurks in a later chapter of the Lotus Sutra. And the chapter is named for him, the Bodhisattva Never Disparaging. What a name is that, huh? The Bodhisattva Never Disparaging. Now, you may know that the Lotus Sutra is a core sutra in the Mahayana tradition, filled with great enlightenment stories. So this chapter begins with the Buddha telling the story of a previous time when monks and nuns and lay people, lay men and women were exceedingly arrogant That's interesting, huh? We want to put them up on a pedestal. But actually, in this case, they were exceedingly arrogant. And then there appeared a person, a bodhisattva, an individual, whose name was Bodhisattva Never Disparaging. Or some people translate it as never disrespectful. What a name. Think of yourself. Could you be a bodhisattva never disparaging? So he was not so obviously a bodhisattva because he didn't study, he didn't teach, or serve in any kind of way that you could discern. He simply bowed to every practitioner he ran into. And he said, I will never disparage you because you someday will attain Buddhahood. I just imagine being at the farmer's market and running into someone who walks up to you and says, I will never disparage you because someday you will attain Buddhahood. So naturally, he irritated everyone. Who are you to tell me that I will attain Buddhahood? So he was disparaged. And the monks and nuns and the laymen and laywomen and lay people would throw rocks and sticks at him and yell. And even when he had to run off in a distance, he would do so, and then he would bow and say, I will never disparage you because you someday will attain Buddhahood. So that's how he got his name. Imagine if you were able to say such a thing to someone who slights you or who thinks politically different than you do. All of us are guilty there, aren't we? Would you be able to say, I will not disparage you because someday you will attain Buddhahood? Even in your imagination, if you would be able to say to someone who opposes your views, someone who voted and adores Trump, or any of his band of infidels, I will never disparage you because you someday will attain Buddhahood. Someday you'll see the light. What if we tried that? I wonder what that would feel like. So naturally, this bodhisattva was never appreciated in his lifetime, as we wouldn't be if we were to act in such a way. Yet he personally rejoiced in that revering, the honoring of all those he encountered, in seeing that they inherently had the possibility of awakening, of attaining Buddhahood. Imagine if you should go into some state or some city where everyone voted in a way different than you did. Could you imagine that they inherently have the possibility of awakening? So they say that when he died, he received the profound teachings of the Lotus Sutra. And his spirit apparently continued to right now, as I'm sharing with you. And apparently they say that billions of people attained the Dharma through his example. Simple and direct, huh? An appreciation of the other no matter how arrogant or mean-spirited, Bodhisattva Never Disparaging could see the light of Buddha that might be obscured, but was flickering within those he encountered. You know, clearly in the shadow behind this talk that I'm giving you, that I'm seeing Trump and his cohort, and I try mightily to be inspired by this Bodhisattva. I want to be inspired by this Bodhisattva. There was one person who was inspired, and his name was Yoshitsune in Japan. So about 1,000 years later, he wrote about this person. Before they realized you didn't need to cross, we're helping others across. Did they think you crossed it alone, the ocean of suffering? Being a poem, I'll read it again. Should always read poems 15 times, but I won't do that. I'll just read it one more time. You didn't need to cross. We're helping others across. Did they think you crossed it alone, the ocean of suffering? Consider that. Before they realized you didn't need to cross. You didn't need to cross because he was already there. We're helping others across. And yet he used his life as a path for others. Did they think you crossed it alone? Living his life, he modeled how to serve. Can any of us cross alone? Is it even possible to cross alone? Cross over what? The ocean of suffering. The ocean of suffering we're all implicated in. The title of this middle captain, he was a captain, Yoshitsune. The title of his verse is, "On the meaning of the teaching, secretly inside he is a bodhisattva." On the meaning of the teaching, secretly inside. Can you imagine just going around your life and just secretly being a bodhisattva? Not showing it, not talking about it, just being it. What would that be like? Do you think he crossed it alone, the ocean of suffering? You know, no matter how we get our news these days, I mean, my alarm rings and I pick up my phone and there's the news. Challenging, disturbing, about the state of the world, which we're all part of. Many of us now are still trying to process the election or the murder yesterday. Trying to process that. Each day, it seems to me that there's reports of more suffering, you know, if you're following the Middle East, disease, poverty, ecological menace. And when we open our email, I don't know about you, but there's statistics on hate groups in this country, desperate people fighting all over the world. So much suffering, so much suffering. And how do we cope with that? You know, I think the suffering, like my heart squeezes tight, still enables a kind of an expression, an expansion of caring that arises out of really looking directly at the suffering. And you know, I'm not just sad, often I'm very mad. I become angry and self-righteous as the rest of us do. Crazy ways humans act, out of our inability to tolerate suffering that all life is heir to. So, you know, the other day I was watching a little white moth circling a tree branch. You know, I don't know what's left at this time of year, but it was like a dance-like motion, you know, flitting one way or another. And then a little white-throated sparrow began to follow it. It looked like a dance, a beautiful dance. But it was the dance of life and death. In our Zen history, there's a story that says that one time Tongchang was washing his bowls, and he saw two birds fighting. They were contending over a frog. Each one wanted to eat the frog. And a monk saw this and asked Tongchang, "Why does it come to that?" As I might have asked myself when I saw the sparrow eyeing the moth. Why does it come to that? And the master replied, "It's only for your benefit. It's only for your benefit." How is it for our benefit? How do we benefit by witnessing the suffering in the world? I say we only benefit if we're willing to witness. If we open our hearts and recognize what is right in front of us. And that's the only way we can be moved to make a difference, to alleviate suffering. So as I was working on this talk, there was a lot of noise in the room. My apartment has a little terrace and a lot going on outside. So I put on my iPod and listened to the beautiful, gentle tones of Hazel Scott's jazz piano. If you don't know her, check her out. It's quite wonderful. She faced awful racism in the 50s and lost her American career over the McCarthy hearings. She wrote really beautiful music. She was involved with protests actively against racism. She was an African-American woman. And she did not tolerate any discrimination, you know. Finally had to move to France, as so many people did at that time. Her music, she was classically trained, but she's noted most for her jazz compositions. Flows so freely, this is heart and mind, because you just feel elevated when you listen to her music. Hazel Scott, look her up. I say that's a form of bowing, of not disparaging life, imagine all that she faced, and yet she still, this beautiful music. Beautiful music. And then I thought of all the musicians and artists who have done the same. So we might look at ourselves in that case, huh? I recently spoke with a young man who is so caught up and affected by the injustice, suffering he sees around him, that he became really discouraged and frustrated, unable to find any ease or joy in his life. And he came to see me, of all people, because he began to doubt the practice of zazen, of sitting meditation, telling me that, it's an escape from reality. But those of us who sit in meditation don't see it that way. We feel like we're like the lotus in the burning fire. We're not escaping from the world, but rather we come closer and more intimate with it. And then we begin to find a way. Maybe it's a small way, maybe it's a big way. We find a way to make a difference. Yes, it can be overwhelming. Yeah, a few years ago, we were studying the paramita of tolerance or patience. And we explored what it is we can't tolerate. What is it that we can't tolerate? And when we began to do that, the energy in the room just brightened, and everyone just, wanted to talk about what they can't tolerate. But what so many people found when they began to list things that they didn't like, or things that they were irritated by, but that they actually did, in fact, tolerate. Whether it was a snoring spouse, or the idea of loss, or climate change, injustice, or depression. It was interesting because just listing the experiences of ideas that we can't tolerate showed us that, in fact, we do tolerate them. Maybe badly, but we do tolerate them. Because to tolerate is to endure. To be able to allow something that we do not like to nevertheless exist. We are ill, but somehow we tolerate our illness. We have no choice. We often say, I can't tolerate the idea of being old or sick or alone. Because when we say that, we're calling into life the idea at that very moment. Already we call into our minds the quality of suffering before we're old or sick or alone. We bring it in. And then that angst creates more suffering. To tolerate, though, is to not turn away, but to face the suffering of the world. To let it in. And once we let it in, we care. And the next action is action. Seeing plastic bags destroying the ecology, get rid of your plastic bags. Model for others that action. If you're upset by the poverty you witness, join a group. There's groups everywhere in your neighborhood, guaranteed in your block. Observe and see how you can serve. Same with structural barriers to justice. You know, a few weeks ago, I ran into a man at the Close Rikers demonstration. We recognized each other from a demonstration in Albany in the early 90s. He dedicated his life to structural issues. He works for unions, and he's made a difference in the world. He is serving, helping others to cross over, as in our little story in the Lotus Sutra. Did we think he crossed over alone, is the phrase? Do we think that we cross over alone? Maybe he's not recognized as a bodhisattva, but he acts like one, helping others to cross over. So, naturally, that made me ask myself again, am I crossing over? What am I doing today to make a difference? Okay, that's just a hint for all of us. Here's a little verse I wrote for our friend, the Bodhisattva, who keeps bowing. Bowing to the arrogant, bowing to the selfish, bowing to the Buddha, always ready to appear. That's how we cross over with everyone, everywhere.